Hey guys, so you know how Righteous Fire builds are pretty fast at clear speed, especially with big explosions? So imagine if your Righteous Fire was always lagging behind you and it could also die, but you have bigger explosions. So this is what this build is. It's not Righteous Fire, but it is your minion turning into kind of Righteous Fire. This is nothing new really. This is using Infernal Legion on Animate Guardian, and then you scale the Animate Guardian and then Infernal Legion. There are some tricks and tips and then some issues with path of building not showing the proper scaling. Some gems like completely wrong. I'm gonna talk about that as well, but I believe Kriparian did this couple weeks ago in Solo Self-Found. It's great for clear speed, but the single target is barely over like 1.3 million, something like that, a bit more, because there are some conditional things from Animate Guardian that are not calculated automatically in path of building. So this is also kind of expensive build because this is using Ashes of the Stars, and mainly because I wanted big AoE for Animate Guardian. So I'm using Anomalous Animate Guardian, which is getting 60% increased AoE per 20 quality. But I'm not going, like, you could get even bigger AoE by going with the Dialos body armor, but I'm using Shako's helmet. Level 35, level 34 Infernal Legion can be expensive. The helmet, you may find cheaper ones, and I actually bought this one with level 3 cast on crit for 1 divine, and I was like, oh wow, that is so cheap, because the other one was like 5-6 divines, until I put on Animate Guardian and realized that I cannot actually cast Animate Guardian. But there is still a trick how to still kind of overcome that. Right, but before that, I want to talk about how exactly this Animate Guardian works, how it scales. So using Infernal Legion, and many people kind of misunderstand, Infernal Legion is not like Righteous Fire. It does not scale with life. It just does like a fixed amount of flat damage to enemies and just drains the user's life. So if you put it on Animate Guardian, it will drain 40% of its life per second as fire damage. It can be mitigated with the maximum fire resistance and then getting regen. But Infernal Legion itself, if we open path of building, here's the weird part. Burning damage doesn't work in PoB. Swift affliction doesn't work in PoB. The damage doesn't change. You know what works? For example, what works? Predator support. It doesn't work actually. It shows that it does work in path of building, but in game it doesn't work. I think it's still using the older coding. The Predator does give a bit of damage, like 13% more damage, just straight up when you link it, but the other part is conditional. If the enemy is tagged with the signal prey, it's actually incorrectly adding damage in path of building, because it's 25% more damage with hits and ailments. For some reason it still works. It's not an ailment. The Infernal Legion is not an ailment, it's just a burning damage. Predator support is actually incorrectly increasing damage in path of building. Now, what works, and I tested them separately, Swift Affliction works, Burning Damage works, Elemental Focus works, but you don't want Elemental Focus because as a land it actually stops Animate Guardian from being able to proliferate shock from Stormgift Gloves. Elemental Army also works, although it does not have big multiplier. I believe Concentrated Effect works, although I did not verify it myself. The things that actually work in game don't work in path of building for some reason. Some people said that they work for them, but for me it does not. So what I'm using is Animate Guardian Enhance, just level 4, just to boost its AoE, purely for the size of AoE. Then Swift Affliction, Burning Damage, and that's all. Otherwise, instead of Enhance, probably would use Concentrated Effect, but I don't want smaller AoE explosions. For single target, you would probably want to use Concentrated Effect. Since these supports don't give damage in path of building, I had to actually add a custom modifier. So in case if you are watching this from the future and you see bigger damage than this, it probably got fixed and you should probably remove these custom modifiers. So this is from the Swift Affliction and this is from the burning damage support. Now the Animate Guardian, I'm gonna show you the items, and by the way, this is really not a bossing build, so I'm just gonna add a couple of clips with mapping with this build, because mapping is very fast and pretty satisfying, but bossing is just not great. I'm kind of done with the build. It was fun for mapping, but for bossing it just lacks like 2-3 times more damage for it to feel great. So I am using Cane of Kulemak, it's pretty cheap to get something like that, just big increased fire damage and then big fire dot multiplier. By the way, this build does not use a Manamus Gaze, which is like 7 divines, and paying 7 divines for like around 20% more DPS is not worth it in my opinion, on these kind of numbers. Cane of Kulemak is pretty cheap and it gives fire dot multi, which is pretty important because it's hard to get damage over time multiplier for minions. Inpulsa, another important part. Then you also need Stormgift gloves. That is what makes Impulse and Stormgift gloves like in general work so well, because when it kills the enemy, it shocks that enemy and proliferates that shock to other enemies. So it doesn't even need to worry about having chance to shock. But if you use Elemental Focus, it does disable these gloves. And I thought that it wouldn't, but it does. So you don't want Elemental Focus on this kind of build. You're still gonna have explosions, but those explosions not going to proliferate and like chain explode a couple screens. Then Legacy of Fury boosts are not actually calculated automatically in path of building, and I did not add a custom modifier for that, so it would have a bit more damage, but we essentially apply a Scorch to nearby enemy, and the Scorch lower enemy all of enemy resistances. Now Mask of the Stitch Demon kind of is almost mandatory. Ideally you would probably want to use Eye of Malice, but that is a bit tricky. If the enemy has too much resistances, it may actually make it worse. So I'm using Mask of the Stitch Demon and it's giving a lot of regen. And mostly because you kind of need this thing, Grave Intentions. That way your minions will have extra maximum energy shield, and Animate Guardian does have a lot of maximum HP. 20% maximum life as extra energy shield. It gains like flat over 5000 energy shield. And once you look at the helmet, it gives 1% life regen per second per 500 maximum energy shield. But it doesn't really have energy shield, it just kind of counts it like a hidden energy shield. So it's already getting over 10% maximum life regen per second. So that is what making Animate Guardian tanky enough to survive this. Now quickly about my other skills. I'm using 3 Spectres, I'm using the Pale Seraphims, Arena Masters and Carnage Chieftain. I'm not sure if they are the best, but they do give a bit of damage. And the Spectres are also linked with Feeding Frenzy. I am also using Phantasmal Flame Wall just to apply strong exposure. It is applying 32% fire exposure. I also like using just Bane with like 2 courses because you don't need to pay an extra mana cost per course. I guess you could use Hexdash, but that requires an extra socket, and this build does not have extra sockets. Also using Tempest Shield, Skitterboards for kind of guaranteed shocks against single target, and then Malevolence, and then boosting Malevolence with the Generosity, then getting Aura effect, Malevolence effect. Also just to automate more things using the Trigger weapon, right, and for movement just using shield charge with faster attacks. And I still got flame dash to go over cliffs. Now the trick, if you got a helmet like this, if you try to summon your Animate Guardian, it's faded. You cannot like summon it, you cannot click on it. So in order to bypass that, you have to put it in a different helmet. So here's the trick, and it didn't work at first, but you place any helmet, and I believe it needs to have the right color and the right socket at the right location. So let's say you place it in the top right corner. You summon your Animate Guardian. Now you can summon. Now you have to go to the town to disable your minions. You go to town to disable your minions, and then you place your Forbidden Shako, and then place Animate Guardian in the same top right corner as it was in this helmet, right? And now you go back to your hideout and you should have your Animate Guardian summoned. There you go. And now you have your Animate Guardian summoned. Although you cannot like directly summon it now. You cannot just click it and summon, because it is linked to cast and crit. If it doesn't work, it needs to also be linked. The other colors, it appears, that do not matter, but it needs to be linked. But the color of the gem that you socket the Animate Guardian, I think must match. Like the color and the location of the socket. So that's how you can maybe get a cheap item that normally disables the skill, but you can still kind of overcome that and still summon it. So I paid 1 divine for this helmet, but I actually forgot who, but there was a person who gave me this helmet. He also had Elemental Focus helmet, but after testing I realized that Elemental Focus actually not really bricks, but disables lightning proliferation. So this one has level 8 Infernal Legion and then level 35 Infernal Legion. They do not stack, the strongest one takes effect. So it's pretty much just level 35 Infernal Legion. Yeah, and now, like for the rest of the items, ideally you would want a mod with the Malevolence effect, but I couldn't get it. Essentially you just need minion damage, like +1 minion. Doesn't affect the minion damage from Infernal Legion, but it will make them tankier. The attack speed doesn't matter, the resistance you don't need more. So there's not much else you can get other than Malevolence effect, but that I believe requires a Hunter's Influence. I tried to craft it, but I just couldn't I couldn't get it. Same goes for the shield. You could get like a recover life on block, and that's what I initially tried to get. Recover life on block plus minion damage. For some reason it's really hard to get it. This is what I end up with. Getting plus 8 to all maximum elemental resistance for my minions is pretty massive. It is currently at 91, well 90 is the cap, so it's at 90, and that's giving a lot of mitigation. And this recover ES on block doesn't really help me at all. It feels like I barely have 3k ES. I would have more with better jewels and just more jewels. This build does not have like mitigation. It's just a lot of life and ES combined, and that's it. And I sometimes get one-shotted, so against bigger bosses it does not feel great. You can get quite a bit of damage on gloves for minions, but other than that, like, there's nothing else particularly special. And on jewels, you pretty much just use minions deal increased damage if you have used the minion skill recently. And for mapping, I do like using Convocation on left click. Shield charge around while holding left click, pretty much to speed up the shield charging as well, and just re-triggering this modifier. And then the rest, just life and energy shield. On the passive skill tree, I do have a pretty good large cluster jewel. I got this myself some time ago. It's just minion damage essentially. Minion attack and cast speed doesn't really matter. You do want this for extra Spectre, and other than that, yeah, I'm gonna include path of building import code in the description. But when viewing PUB, if you want to see the Animate Guardian items, just select item sets and see AG. Make sure that your Animate Guardian is set to AG items. As a Necromancer, like, you can adjust a couple of things. You may actually take the Bone Barrier. It would make minions tankier, and you could have like the Bone Shield, which I tend to forget to click if it's not on left click. So if you're gonna be doing this build, you're gonna have to modify it for yourself, because my playstyle may not be the same as yours. I wouldn't really use this for bigger bosses unless you make it tankier. So yeah, that is pretty much all. I don't really have a concrete idea for the next build, so if you got some interesting build ideas, leave them in the comments below. I do want to experiment more with Ashes and maybe Diala, since I got Ashes now. I don't know, something with the AL quality, but I pretty much checked all the AL quality like multiple leaks ago, and I'm not sure if there's anything really new. But yeah, leave your ideas in the comments below. I may just randomly get inspired by your build ideas. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.